Hello? 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 Thank you for finding your way inside this morning. We will be spending all the afternoon events inside today due to the uncertain weather, though I really appreciate your faith in the sun. There was some disappointment we were inside, but we had to make a decision and make it stick. So thank you for your understanding. And with that, I'm going to say very little to you now so you can hear more from these two folks. Please welcome Michael Carlisle and Jason Roberts.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, thank you. 1, 2, 3. How are we doing? Hunter?
Are you on?
Hunter? 1, 2, 3.
Can you hear him?
Can you hear me? Hi. I'm the agent. He's the author. We have a roundabout way we have a journey that got us from an interesting beginning to a even more interesting finish, and it's still going on. And the finish is the Pulitzer Prize.
Yeah.
And I didn't win it,
Well, you kind of did. Yeah.
but I helped get us there.
I will give you a very important piece of advice. When you win the Pulitzer Prize, you will get invited to the ceremonial dinner, and you'll get exactly one ticket. The advice that another person that I know, who has 2 Pulitzer Prizes, said the first thing you have to do is ask them for 4 tickets, and you need to invite your agent and your editor. And it was very, very good advice, and it was a wonderful thing to be able to sit by your side, when that happened. That was great.
The most important change is that in Jason's obituary, whenever that comes, it will say Pulitzer Prize. Whereas in my obituary, it'll say 15% of a Pulitzer.
Pulley.
We are very, very, very close friends. And our friendship is marked by years of trust, getting to face challenges that publishing presented in fairly strong suit. We play a long game. We're in our 2nd book together. I'll do a little bit about me so that you know how Jason came to Carlisle and Company, which was my agency at the time.
I will want to tell the sexiest part of that story.
Okay,
though.
you can tell any part you want.
Okay.
I'm here through nepotism. My parents were friends of the Halls, and I worked in a company that was very strict about how many weeks of vacation you got, all of 2. And I guess I had the makings of an agent, because I figured out that if I went to see my parents at a writers' conference, that wouldn't count as vacation. And so I came out here in the early 80s and stayed Mama Bear, Papa Bear, Little Bear in a chalet that the conference gave my parents. And I was able to see my parents, learn about the conference, learn about how the interaction of agenting and writers worked here. And over time, I have been privileged to be associated with this conference for more than 30 years. So it's an extraordinary place. I believe in it. I support it. And it's a great honor to be spending a little time talking about one journey that came out of, not exactly out of here, but it has led here. And it is that I have a philosophy about sharing. And you're going to meet later on a colleague of mine who worked for me and still works with me, whose name is Mike Mangello. He has great skills. He's a wonderful agent. And he and I tag team together. And in the case of Jason, I tag team with a woman whose life I changed when she went from being my secretary to coming to work with me and becoming a full-scale agent at the agency I set up. And Jason's book, first book, A Sense of the World, was handled by Michelle Tesler. Are we together on that story?
Yes, it was. Here's the interesting thing, is that it was handled by Michelle Tesler after you had left that company, and she actually spun out on her own. So what happened for me is that when I was, around the turn, around back at the end of the 20th century, I was, trying to try to launch a book writing career. As everyone does, you try to find agents. And the best advice I can give is just find the books that you love, go back to the acknowledgement sections, and find who the names are, the agents. And one of the names that popped up again and again for me was Michael Carlyle, and because he was James Glick's agent. He was a Davis Sobel's agent who wrote the book Longitude, and it's like, I thought, wow, whoever this person is, and just the name, Michael Carlyle was like this, superstar as far as I was concerned. So much so that I did not think of myself worthy of approaching him. But I did follow Carlyle and Company, and then he had merged with what's now Inkwell, and his assistant had gone off and become independent. And so I had the timidity to approach her, and so she took me on as a client, and that's when he sold the first book, was A Sense of the World. In the process of selling that book, it was sold to an imprint of HarperCollins, and between the time that when we sold the book and when the book came out, the acquiring editor had been fired. The imprint itself had been closed down, and we were approaching publication date, and I realized that nobody in HarperCollins had even read my book, much less had any stake in doing it. They were just publishing it out of obligation. And at the same time that I'm doing this, I'm working on my next book proposals. So I had a couple of book proposals that I had put together, and I had run them by my agent, who was his assistant at the time, and she didn't like any of them. And she passed. And I had one of the longest long dark nights of the soul. And I did this really kind of, I guess, a ballsy thing, but it certainly didn't feel like the time, is that I told her, I'm firing you. I need to find a more simpatico agent. And you know what? This person is a lovely person, and is just nothing but graceful. And this comes down to the point of that if she could see these two involved book proposals and couldn't at least see, okay, this is Jason, this is how he works, this is his mind at work, or something like that, let's see if we could change it, or so on and so forth. It was that she just gave them both a pass. And that felt a lot to me. So there I was. I didn't have a publisher. I didn't have an editor. I didn't have an agent. And my book was coming out.
That sounds normal.
Yes. So I literally printed up brochures. I literally invited myself to book selling conferences, to Book Expo America. I threatened HarperCollins that if you didn't let me inside, I would set up a table at the booth and promote my own book. And so they let me do it on the inside. And but basically what happened is that the book was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle. And so,
That book.
Yeah. So I go out, I fly, and I do my National Book Critics Circle. They have you do a reading the night before the awards, and in an auditorium. And there I was, and I figured, well, this is my swan song. I guess I'm going to just do this little reading. And I did it. And then afterwards, this man comes up to me, and he's like wearing a bow tie. And he says, "Hi, most of the authors here are actually clients of mine. I'd like to introduce myself to you. My name is Michael Carlisle." And I was like, I know who Michael Carlisle. To me, that was like if Lou Reed had walked into the room or something like that. But this is the point: is that there I was at my lowest point, and I found somebody who I had been wanting to in the first place. It would have been nice, I think, maybe if I hadn't, cut myself down and had the balls to approach him in the first place. And one of those book proposals was Every Living Thing, by the way.
So I have been very, very lucky. I spent 18 years in a large agency that's powerful, very, very well known in the entertainment business. It's from those of us who remember computers as computers and not phones. It is the IBM to computers. It's a large agency, William Morris, and they had extraordinary writers. James Michener, James Baldwin, Gore Vidal, Robert Penn Warren, extraordinary, high literary, low literary. They did everything, and I was a vice president in that department. And the best thing that they did was leave me alone. And they didn't impose, and I got very, very lucky in the beginning of my career. I have this instinct about nonfiction. I haven't studied it. I studied political science. I went to law school. I worked in human rights. I've done a lot of things, but I have never been there's no such thing as agent school, but William Morris was pretty close to it, and I was very lucky to be associated with a bunch of books that are still pretty well known. One of them is called Friday Night Lights. The other is called James Glick, and he has a new book that I will give you a money-back guarantee on. If you don't like it, I will buy it back from you. It's called The Telephone. It's a social history of the phone. And when you think of the phone and what it has done and how it changed us from telegraph to what we use now, what you're using now, to photograph Jason, it's pretty extraordinary. He's with me, Davis Sobel, Simon Schama. I have been really lucky. And that night, when Jason was there, I had other clients who were up for that award. It has not happened since, and it won't happen again, but that night was great. I walked up to Jason, and we reconnected. I knew of him, obviously, because Michelle and I were close. She chose not to leave and join me at Inkwell. She chose to set up her own agency, which was a great idea. She's a great agent. She's on her own, and she works with Amanda Eyre, who also comes from this conference. So she's great, but I was reconnecting or connecting with Jason. And I thought we should work together, and he sent me a copy of his proposal for Two Shipwrecks. It was as I remember, there were two proposals.
One was Every Living Thing.
One was Every Living Thing, and the other was Two Shipwrecks. He and I got very excited, and I wrote him a note saying, "I'd like to offer you representation," and he wrote back, "I will most happily take you up on your offer of representation. I'm honored by your time and attention." He's a Pulitzer writer here. Mindful that it's a rare opportunity, I don't make these choices lightly. I can make this choice easily. Let's spend the rest of this week polishing Two Shipwrecks. I'll send you the updated version March 26th, and we'll take it from there. If it feels like we already have a solidly established working relationship, I'm looking forward to working with you. That's March of 2007. So that's a long time ago.
But who's counting?
But who's counting? We play a long game, the two of us.
So why is it that I got really lucky and had this amazing editor with book proposals ready to go, and it somehow took me 17 years to publish one of those books? We'll be honest with you. He was a good shipmate, but we had some storms.
Nonfiction, unlike novels and fiction, can be sold on proposals. That's why Sam Friedman has this wonderful focus on workshop on proposal writing. For those of you who want to work in this area, that's a class, a master class that I highly recommend. Sam has brought to the world many, many, many great journalists and people who write real books, real nonfiction books like the ones we heard last night. I thought last night's reading was incredible. The power of Gene, of Hector, of Jason, the whole thing was incredible, and it made me very proud to apply both in fiction, my skills both in fiction and in nonfiction. But nonfiction has the advantage of working off of a relatively small proposal. It's 40, 50 pages, 30, 20, whatever the number. There are two questions that you have to answer. Why this book, and why this author for this book? And then what they would like is that you're a rock star with 20 million followers and you're Madonna. That's what they really want, because that's easy when you have followers. Authors don't generally have followers. So what they have is good writing. It's in the proposal. It answers those two questions. And Jason hit it with his proposals, which were extraordinary. They were unusual, out of the box, very different. One was set in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, about the discovery of Japan, and the other had to do with Linnaeus, a biography of Linnaeus. But because Jason is an unusually talented writer on the page, I had two very strong proposals as one submission. And so what I did was I sent it to you can either send it to one person, or in our case, we sent it to across the board. The reason being, it was a strong proposal. What was I looking for? I was looking for the market to lift it so that we would get to a point where these projects could be supported by Jason's advance and not his robbing banks, which is the other alternative, which he's done before.
It's a hobby.
It's another thing he's done. So we went to Bruce Nichols. He was then at Houghton Mifflin. We went to Norton. We went to Random House. We went to HarperCollins. We went to Scribner. We went to part of Random House. We went across the board. And we had meetings on the 24th of May, 2027, and then the next day, what?
That's the future,
7, sorry.
A long time ago.
And we had these meetings. What's the meeting? The meeting is they've read the proposal, they invited us, they like it, you're selling. You're in a boardroom, you're in a small conference room, you're somewhere in the house, and they are, the idea is there a fit? Do people understand the book the way he's envisioning it? Do they have something that's interesting and different from the other publisher? So we worked together, and it turned out we had multiple bids. We had multiple bids because it was so good. And one of those bids was from a very, very good house, and
Which we will not mention.
which we took. It was right up there. It was among the most successful nonfiction sales I'd had. The only other one involved Princess Diana, so you can see that he's right up there with the big sellers.
So this was heady. This happened very quickly. I mean, we're talking a few months from me having nothing to this guy doing his rock star act.
So the way the contract works is some money is paid on signing, and then the rest, and that's financing his writing, and the rest is in anticipation of success, of delivery, and then later publication and some time afterwards. So one of the things you have to remember about writing is it is good to rob a bank because a quarter of whatever the advance is not a great deal of money at any level. And even at this level, which was high, it was significant, but it had to be carefully managed by Jason, which he did.
I had a family to raise. It did have to be spent. Yes.
Over to you. So
Okay. Yeah. So he did his job. He basically, helped build the momentum, and it was a very heady deal. But then, this is 2007, and I didn't mind working under deadlines. I haven't missed deadlines. But before this, I was working technical writing, so I was very, very used to things have to be accurate and on time. But what I didn't quite get was that the editorial relationship that you have is happening at the same time that there are internal politics at the publication house, but also, 2007 was a different publishing world. And so I think I had like 18 months before I needed to turn in my first samples, first sample chapters and all. I went ahead and did that. But during that time period, things started just getting really weird. All of a sudden, Amazon was completely dominant. The Borders book chain, went out of business. And all of a sudden, publishers were freaking out. And one of the things that I think that was happening internally was that they were starting to have second thoughts about spending this kind of money, or so on and so forth. And here's the thing. You want to get a good advance because you want them to sit up and pay attention when the time comes to market your book. But the size of the advance is not necessarily an inherent success, because the sales of your book are going to be weighed against that. And so I think that what started to happen is that they were starting to kind of wonder what the equation was going to be. Would they be able to sell this book? Would it be a sexy enough book? So on and so forth. And I started working with my editor, and I started giving him, drafts of multiple chapters, and I was working with the issues of, okay, well, how do we introduce these characters? How do we bridge the fact that there's not that much information from here, so on and so forth, putting it back and forth. And so I was literally pulling the book and putting it into dry dock and discussing these discussions, these issues. But it wasn't a finished book. It wasn't sitting, landing in his lap. And that's when we just kind of started getting some weirdness from the publishing house.
So one of the difficult things is you have that meeting, and you pretty much have to decide, I'm going to marry this editor, and I have a child, and we're going to birth this child together, and then the editor and publisher will publish the child. And it's awfully hard to know how someone is going to be a year later, what kind of position they're going to be, both emotionally, just professionally. Are they on the rise? Are they, what's happening in the politics? Publishing is a little bit like the Vatican. It's there are different parts of their interest groups. There's a whole new generation. There's lots of good things happening, but it's always moving. And it is one thing that if you say, well, what do agents do? Do they just sit back and take their money and and just wait and cash checks? No. We try to watch this evolution inside the house as, and hopefully before, any danger happens. And in my case, I was trusting the established nature, the established status of the person that had agreed and wanted to work with Jason, who turned out to be having trouble connecting with the essence of what Jason needed.
And he didn't want to have a dialogue with me. He was a very patrician editor, and it turned out that he's not the kind of person that wants to get in under the hood and see this. And so what I thought was openness to discuss, he saw as like insecurity about my work. Well, what's very interesting is that the first milestone that you make is that you have to turn in half of the book, and then you make that milestone, then they accept it. I turned in half of the book on schedule, and my editor wrote me, said, "Congratulations, this is masterful." And we celebrated, and we were waiting for them to authorize and to cut the next check. And they didn't do that.
No, and this is one of the worst stories. I have one other that's terrible, but this wasn't cashing checks. This was guerrilla warfare, because what we realized was that there was a complete misunderstanding, not of our doing. It was exactly the book that Jason had presented, but they started to see problems that were apparent in the original proposal that they hadn't noticed. 2 shipwrecks involves 2 people. Do they meet? Don't they meet? Is one of the questions. And
The proposal said they never met.
and they said, well, gosh, they don't meet. And they should meet. You've got to make them meet. And we said, sorry, that didn't happen. This is nonfiction. We can't make this up. And so it deteriorated. It deteriorated to the point where this house, major house, by then Inkwell is 2007. We're 5 years old now. It's six years later. We're starting to Inkwell is starting to really have a position in the marketplace, and we run into a major disagreement. A disagreement that actually led to the cancellation of this contract.
But there's some more stories from the trenches on this. So yeah, so what happens from my standpoint as the author, I thought he'd accepted it. He said it was masterful, and then I heard nothing more again from my editor, and so I started thinking, well, and Michael started saying, well, I think there's some misgivings, and so I started trying to rework it. And this is now, we're now 2 years into the process. So I start thinking, well, maybe it can be sexier this way. And so I write some sample chapters, send it to my editor. I do it another time. I send months pass. I send another a different thing. So basically, here I am. It's like you're trying to win over the woman who doesn't love you, the person who doesn't love you anymore. And it's like, and they're stonewalling you. And so I kept trying.
I know that
things.
feeling.
Yeah. And so there I was, and I didn't know. I thought that I would just have to kind of quietly do this, and it got to the point where. And I will remember this. We had Reagan Arthur was one of my roommates. Reagan Arthur is amazing publisher. She has her own imprint.
Board member of the community.
And the board member of the community. And she happened to be in the same room when I was discussing what I've been doing with my editor. And I said, yes, I have submitted rewrites 19 times. And she shouted from across the room, 19 times? And I realized that's not usual. And so there I was. I literally spent. The sadness about this is that we lost about two, maybe 3 books in the period of time in which we kept trying to regurgitate this and kept trying to fix that which was not broken, and and I unfortunately I try to work my way through and power my way through. And it was almost like, so there was a point here where we felt like we needed almost like marriage therapy, right? And you remember you started reaching out to see whether we could find a different editor.
This is getting so sad. I want to tell you how it gets better. Let's get happy. What happens is they don't want this book. And the way a contract is written, if they don't accept, the author is on the hook for repaying the money. That's the part that you live with. This is a dangerous game. It's a dangerous game. That's why I'm in favor of bank robbery, because it's one way to keep going. I used a lawyer to create a settlement. I knew Jason was discouraged and depressed by this. This was overwhelmingly it was more than horrible. It was just, it was truly, it was a terrible, terrible place for a creative person to be. Not get answers, to get answers that were falsified, to then rewrite history as lawyers always do. Oh, well, you didn't do this. The whole thing. It was ugly. But I had faith in one aspect of of this picture, which is that what we had done that had interested 8 other publishers was actually salvageable. And we needed to pull back, regroup, and find another publisher.
Wait, before we get into that, I want to.
I don't want to depress
I know, I need to add some agony here, please.
It's your agony.
It's cathartic for me.
Yeah.
So here's the thing, and you guys need to know this, is that it turns out that the language of the publishing contract is that it isn't if your book isn't bad, it's if we don't want it. There's some kind of wishy-washy thing. So what they're able to do is say it doesn't meet our needs or something like that. So what happened for me is that I had been going up against this stone wall and submitting all these different rewrites approaches, and it was like, I can change, honestly, and
He's trying to please.
Yeah, exactly.
He's trying to please.
But what happened here is that all of a sudden I didn't have one vision of the book in my head. I had like half a dozen visions of the book in my head, and it was a huge wish-wash. But the thing is that at this particular time, because the publishing firm was, the publishing world was really going through uncertainty, it wasn't the numbers to them. If they had said to me, look, we don't think we can sell enough copies to justify your proposal, will you just accept the advance as the full amount? I probably would have accepted that. But instead they put you in this circumstances. But what we did, and you did this as much for me as for anybody else, is that now we're in the situation where we need to prove to ourselves that there's a book here, and that it really wasn't, even though they never flat out said this is bad, they just didn't want it. And so can you talk about how we did that?
Yeah. When you're close to someone, professionally and personally, which was our case, you've seen 7 or 8 versions of something, you start to not see it as well as somebody who reads it from the beginning ab initio, from someone with fresh eyes. So I engaged a good editor to read the material, not with just knowing he knew who Jason was, but had never read his first book. So it was a fresh reading. And he bolstered both of us by saying, this is incredible, and there's something wrong at the publishers, not necessarily with what you're doing. So he gave us a boost that we both needed. Because if he was on the hook for 85% and I was on the hook for 15%, in terms of our sorrow and how badly we felt, we were each 100% in the dumps. Mm-hmm. So to get somebody to say, wait a second, you guys are wrong, you guys are right, this is good, gave me the confidence to move on to other publishers. And before you go on, I remember we said there were 2 proposals? Mm-hmm. Okay, it's the second book of the 2-book of the first house. There were 2 books. Book 1, Shipwrecks. Book 2, Every Living Thing. They were clear in Jason's mind. There was research being done in the Linnaean libraries that was coming out during the 4 or 5 years that we're talking about. Right. And with that progress on the Linnaean side, Jason said, you know what? This 2 Shipwrecks I've seen it too many times. Let's put it aside. I think what we should move with is something that no one has seen, Every Living Thing. And I said, that's a great idea. We've gotten affirmation from an outside editor who really knows, freelance editor who really knows, isn't going to give us false hope. And with that, Jason went to work on the proposal for Every Living Thing.
Yeah, but just to be clear, that both of those books had been sold to the previous editor, and I asked for and was given permission to work on them simultaneously. So, yeah, and basically they said, okay, well, which one do you want to publish first? And I said, well, let's do the Two Shipwrecks one, because I thought that was going to be easier, and also because I knew, like you said, there was some external research groups that were doing stuff, so I thought we'll wait some years for that. But whole point about me trying this kind of work that I do, it's very, very, very research driven. I'm actually, I'm actually rather brisk when it comes to writing historical narrative nonfiction. But what happened here is that it's almost like, Odysseus trying to find his way home, or Moses in the wilderness or something like that. And so we had spent this amount of time, but what he saw is that I had lost confidence in myself. And he did what was necessary to get things back in focus with me. And this is what I want to say, is that your agent is not your therapist, and don't try to make them your therapist. But they maybe are the therapist for your career, and they can certainly be the therapist for your work in progress. So that idea that that he basically looked to me and said and thought we need to build his confidence back up. What I should have done was the same thing I had done before with my previous, with my agent. And, I'd had the clarity to say, what, we're not simpatico, this isn't working, going to change that. But instead, I had spent all this time going, well, I can change, and molding my vision and losing my vision. So he's the guy who reminded me of the kind of writer I was trying to be. And that's one of the things that an agent is important for. You have a relationship with them because you convey to them the kind of writer you're trying to be, and they will sometimes have to remind you.
The good news is we found a publisher who loved Every Living Thing in a proposal form. Head of a house, it's called Random House, so head of a Random House, who absolutely got on the same wavelength as Jason. Understood how Jason's mind was kind of wacky. I do want to read you something, speaking of wacky. I want to read you his bio, just in case, forget the Pulitzer. Here is Jason's, what I used. One sec. This is his byline. Born in Southern California, Roberts earned his high school diploma at 14. Then took a 5-year hiatus from education. He worked as a day laborer, dishwasher, late-night disc jockey, matriculated at this UC Santa Cruz, and graduated with a degree in English. In addition, he started a media company, pioneering online education. He's also the author of several instructional texts on multimedia programming. Okay, he also worked at a company called Apple.
That didn't work in there. I don't know why.
Oh, and I know that Jason is probably has one of the wackiest brains of any that I've worked with. And the great thing is that the publisher of Random House saw that wacky brain and wasn't intimidated by it. He got Jason, he got what we were trying to do. He saw that Jason was the kind of author that needed back and forth. He gave that. He trusted Jason. He empowered him to write his best. He wasn't worried about the time that was elapsing, because publishing is all about deadlines. It's a contract that is written at the beginning that says you're going to deliver in 18 months. Who the hell knows what's going to happen in 18 months? You might have COVID, you might have a family tragedy, the world may be very different during those 18 months. Are you really going to be able to deliver in 18 months? Who knows? But publishing is very, very strict about these guideposts, and they take themselves very seriously. What I was fascinated last night was how long those authors worked. Hector did the mining book rather quickly. The other book that he's been working on seems to have taken longer. It's important to let writers write at with the time they need to write. Otherwise, sell vacuum cleaners, sell muffler parts. Don't look to authors and writers and artists to suddenly be mechanized, and publishing does that. It really does. So this guy at Random was absolutely wonderful. He believed in Jason. I can't say enough about their relationship because it suddenly went completely between them, and I was left out of it, which is the best way when author and editor work well. And we delivered a book that.
Well, we delivered. Hang on. Yeah. So the thing I want to say is that what Michael said, early on, was that you need the proper editor. You need the right relationship. And I didn't even know what the kind of relationship would be. He knew that there are editors that have give and take, so on and so forth. When we marketed the book, put it out again, we had two deals that were functionally equivalent. And he said, you make the decisions just based on, which is the one that you feel like you could actually have a dialogue with. And I made that decision. And the thing is that he gave me complete pushback. I turned in a draft of the book that had a completely different structure, completely different approach. And he said, this doesn't work. Let's redo it. And I was so happy about that. I did not mind going back to the well because he was still trying to say, this vision doesn't work, this does. And that iterative energy that he had was what I needed.
I think the one thing I can tell you about writers, particularly journalists and good writers, is that they all want editing. Any writer, any nonfiction writer who doesn't want editing is maybe cruising on a different course. Most people I know, the Pulitzer Prize winning reporters I work with, the people who work with words and want them to really be in their best shape, like editing. And that's what happened here. We had an editorial relationship between the publisher, he happened to be the publisher as well, of the house, and Jason, who delivered.
And fortunately, they picked up on my next book, and which is scheduled to come out in 2028, something like that, which will be the Two Shipwrecks book. Hey!
I think the moral of the story is get lucky. Because I was very, very lucky to work with the people. I've been lucky. I've had an extraordinary career of just following my gut and having relationships with people who are so different, so talented, so top of their field. I am often humbled by. I'll tell you a story about. We're in the World Cup, right? So this is high season for World Cup. We're, I guess, the semis. I take our foreign rights team to Frankfurt, where the Frankfurt International Book Fair takes place. And I stayed in a hotel where this is 5 or 6 years ago when Germany was the #1 team, when they won the World Cup. I'm staying in a pretty fancy hotel, which I upgraded for myself because I like comfort. I'm not shy to mention it. And I'm staying in a fancy hotel where the German soccer team is staying. And I suddenly get back from a long day in a large arena. It's my Willy Loman moment. I'm sitting at a card table and I'm pushing the books, Jason's and others, to an editor an acquiring editor who's German, Ukrainian, whatever he or she is. They are seeing tons of agents, and it's my job in about 7 or 10 minutes to sell them our list. It's not easy. It's exhausting. I get back to the hotel, and there are flocks of young women just crazy outside my hotel, and I'm going, what is going on? I get in, and they say, Das football team is here. And so I happened to make the mistake of getting in the elevator with 2 or 3 of their biggest stars. Now, in those days, I was a little paunchier than I am now. But the idea of being in an enclosed space with those Adonises who were at the top of their field and the best in the world and the best athletes, and I thought, Jesus Christ, what am I doing here? So I complained to my best friend. I said, you know, I really had a humiliating moment. I am vain, and here I am against the best in the world. He said, wait, whoa, slow down. They won the World Cup, but they don't know how good you are at what you do. And so with that, my ego was picked up off the floor, and I'm here to share it with you. It's been a great pleasure, but I think working with Jason, as it has been with other clients, is such an honor, and I wouldn't run the same 70 years that I've been around any other way. It's been a great, great pleasure.
Thank you, Michael. And thank you. Were we supposed to do any questions, Q&A, or is it time? Are we done?
There's a question. Hi.
Yes. You, sir.
I heard a much shorter version of this, but it contained a piece of information I found quite interesting and encouraging, which had to do with the number of times you pitched different versions of what became the book that won the Pulitzer, and each time it seemed like you were fully invested in this, this version, this way of framing the story, and yet it hadn't shot down, hadn't shot to the whiteboard. Do I have that right?
Yeah, I would say that, what I did is I was able to give my current editor, I think, like maybe 3 or 4 different, completely different structural approaches. The book actually, it's a dual biography now, which is such a weird beast, but it really started out as a straight biography of Joseph Linnaeus, and then it moved to be Linnaeus and the adventures of his students, and then it turned out to be Linnaeus and his group of students, and then this other guy and his group of students, and I called that the Nature Wars, and I thought that would be the metaphor that I was using here. And in each one of these cases, my editor gave me pushback, did not solve my problems for me, just said, no, I don't think that's it. And that's the interesting thing, is that your editor cannot solve your problems, doesn't come back and say specifically, no, you need to do this, you need to do that, but can hold you up to whatever standards you have. But there's a surprising vulnerability to your agent and your editor, and if you can't be vulnerable to them, then I think that that's very important. In this particular case, what I'm doing, if I had a biography of Winston Churchill, and it's like, okay, this can't be about, the circus acrobat who lived next door or something like that. But that's not what I try to do. I try to look into, the unexplored portions of the past. So the reality is I'm not quite sure what's going to happen once I get down into it. So to be able to understand that kind of focused uncertainty is not the same as not knowing what you're doing, but just being willing to do that. And maybe it would look like it was uncertain to an unsympathetic person, but to the right editor, it looks like you're on the job.
Yes, hi.
So just a question about the situation. Was your editor for the pirate story, were they connected to the publishing house? So
Yes, they were the senior editor of a major publishing house.
the one that had brought the proposal?
Yes.
Yes, and they just stopped responding to my emails for 2 or 3 years.
And did they also buy the proposal for Every Living Thing?
Yes.
Yes, they had. That was a 2-book deal. So they could have just said, "Hey, why don't you write the other book instead?" or whatever. Very gratifying to find out that really.
There is one thing that I want to add.
Go for it. We're going to say the same thing.
The independent publisher that we find that we left. That's the polite way of putting it. That rejected the books was the first to write me to congratulate Jason on his Pulitzer, which I thought was pretty cool. Sir.
Michael, talk a little bit more about luck.
Luck. Luck. Are you writing a book on luck? Because I'm interested.
The reason I'm saying, I had a high school economics teacher who wrote in my yearbook, "Don't believe in luck, you make the luck." It was only when I got got to my 60s that I realized that was total bullshit.
I didn't want to do this panel for a number of reasons, and answering a question like that was one of them. I'm a show-off, and I'm also shy, so it's a weird combination. I would say how you are in the world and how you present affects how other people see you, and I have made a very concerted effort to be kind, to understand, because I'm the son of writers, I know how hard it is to write. There isn't a part of me that could write a chapter, let alone a book. I'm pretty good at a memo. I can do a letter. Beyond that, the 2 or 3 times I've tried to get things published, they've been rejected as quickly as I've sent them. So I'm not a writer. I really understand the life of, I think I understand because I lived it, what it's like to be in a house where people are creating stories. We're storytellers, or you're storytellers. The luck part is being out, being who you are, being somebody whose answer is honestly. I have a client who just had a book adapted and is on the air on Peacock right now. And people are not liking the fact that the adaptation is different from the book. And they're writing, because we set up the emails so that the author doesn't get them, I get them. And I answer every one of them. Every one of them. I rejected somebody's manuscript about 20 years ago, and he wrote back and he said, your rejection has helped me. What charity do you like? I have accumulated GE stock, and I want to give it to a charity that you like. Is that lucky? I would say so. Did I do anything? No, I was polite and I answered him. And the charity was a storefront in Harlem, which is a school that helps very small young kids. So I'm not your economics professor, and I don't know how you have been in life, but for me, just being straight and being honest has been a very good touchstone.
Can I answer Michael's question for him as well? The interesting thing, the thing I realized is that, calling it luck, is that what we had is in a microcosm was like literally the most extreme highs and lows you can possibly get. And the thing about it is that I'm reminded of like those surfers that surf those big waves. And you've got a picture of them, right? And they're on, at the big wave, and the big wave's looming above them, and they're surfing, and they're amazing surfers, and that's just so wonderful. But that's just a small fraction of the process. The wave crashes. They have to survive that. They have to go through that. A good, an expert big wave surfer accepts that part of the process is going through the turbulence. And it looks like it's luck to be exploiting this, and that it was great that he did this, and we had this auction and blah 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 blah. And yes, that felt really good, and yes, it felt really bad while the other things happened. But you know what? They're actually part of the same process, and luck comes from understanding that it's all part of the same process. Surfing the big wave involves almost creatively not drowning as well. And throughout this entire time, Michael did not write me off. He believed in me more than I believed in myself. I know that's a cliche or something like that, but it's absolutely true. And the last thing he wanted is to see me drown. And I think he was worried about that because he thought I could go back to being, a late night disc jockey or Apple Computer or something like that. Yeah, but that idea that he was able to see that was necessary. So I call that luck. And so being able to handle every phase of the business, which is a very volatile business, and not extract it as something personal, I think that's a wonderful discipline, and I thank Michael for that. Okay, okay, thank you very much.
All right.
All right, man. We did.
Testing, testing.
Hello? Hey there. I love it when you all fall silent and listen to me. Anyway, thanks for finding your way to Bar 1. You are certainly getting the complete Community of Writers experience, running around from bar to bar, inside, outside, sun, rain, extreme temperature differences. We will be in Bar 1 all of today, because the weather is uncertain, even though we have hopes for the sun tomorrow, perhaps. And I know some of you are interested in those bright pink posters called Agents Hour. We will explain all of that when we get to the Agents Hour. If you are enrolled in the program, you should have received an informational email from Brett this morning explaining that process. I also want to welcome members of the public to this afternoon, and just remind them that the discussion with the editors is open to the public, as is the first half hour of the Agents Hour. And then we will take you away to some other place. And with that, here's Mike Mangiello.
Thanks, Lisa. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. It's good to see you all here. I'm delighted to be joined by Todd and LaShonda here, and thank you both for sharing your wisdom and perspective with us today. I'm just going to briefly introduce them, jump into my questions. I think it's going to be about an hour, so I think we'll probably talk for like half an hour or 45 minutes and then leave it to you guys for some questions. Todd Portnowitz is senior editor at Alfred A. Knopf, where his list includes a range of history, pop culture, fiction, and poetry books. He's also a noted Italian translator who's received honors from the Academy of American Poets and the Breadloaf Translators Conference. His prior works of translation include Roman Stories by Jhumpa Lahiri, and his next work of translation, Party with Cassowary, is forthcoming from Knopf in January. His work has appeared in Guernica, Poetry, and the Southwest Review, among other journals, and he's co-director of the Brooklyn-based reading series for writer-translators, Us and Them. Todd, thanks for being here. LaShonda Anakwa is an editor at Tiny Reparations Books, acquiring fiction and select nonfiction titles. She's building a list that captures a wide array of human experiences, is drawn to edgy, voice-driven commercial, book club, and upmarket fiction centered on unique characters. Smart, immersive prose, written with craft and wit, always captures her attention, as well as themes of geographic and cultural identity and questions of coming of age. LaShonda is also looking for transformative memoirs, as well as narrative nonfiction that answers the why and how regarding the socio-political economic systems we're all mired in, with a clear vision of the way forward. So thank you both for being here. Yeah, very deserving of applause. To start, I wonder if you could both just speak a bit about what made you want to be an editor and what made you want to be an editor at Tiny Reparations and Knopf, respectively.
Is this better? So I kind of fell into book publishing. I got very, very lucky. Growing up, I was always a bookworm. Always had my nose in a book, and I knew I wanted to do something book-centered. So I thought that maybe I wanted to be a librarian, but that didn't work out. So I took a couple of internships, and one thing led to another, and I ended up in Simon & Schuster. So I was shadowing an assistant who ended up leaving, and they asked me to take on her job. So I just kind of fell into it and loved it and decided to stay and worked my way up until I became a full editor. So I started off at Simon & Schuster, and they do a lot of nonfiction there, and I always knew I wanted to do fiction. So I ended up assisting a few editors who did both, and I saw the merits of how nonfiction can also be very narrative, and for a second I was confused. I thought, okay, maybe I want to do nonfiction. But there's just that feeling that fiction gives you that I feel like nonfiction can't quite touch. So I guess like 2 years, 3 years of being an associate editor, Tiny Reparations Books came calling, and they asked me if I wanted to be an editor. And I couldn't say no. So that's how I ended up there.
Hello. Speaking of librarians, I grew up in Central Florida as the son of a librarian who ran the libraries for the Brevard County, Florida. And so I was just always seeing my mom picking which books to buy for the county and kind of watching that from that perspective, and became a book person because of that. And after that, I did an internship. I went to the University of Florida and did an internship at the University Press on their just kind of coding manuscripts for print. I was putting in like little caret keys and saying header, body. It was different times. I'm not that old, but a lot has changed quickly. And then I ended up doing a master's in Italian Lit, and I was sort of in the poetry and translation worlds. And because you need rights to publish translations, I started emailing various publishers to get rights to publish things. And long story short, that put me in touch with a woman named Ann Close, who came to this community of writers for many, many years. And she said, "Why don't you interview for this job?" I said no, like an idiot. I went back to grad school in Madison, Wisconsin, where I was doing a master's in Italian Lit. And I did 1 year of the doctorate and was like, oh my God, am I only going to read Italian books for the rest of my life? And I moved to New York, where my aunt was, lived on her couch for a bit, and kind of just waited for a job to open up with Anne. And eventually it did. I started there in 2016 as an editorial assistant, and just stuck around long enough for things to shuffle, and I now edit probably about 60-70% history, and some fiction, some poetry, and some fiction in translation.
Great, thank you both. It's clear in both of your answers, I think, the extent to which your work is driven by personal curiosity, surprise, discovery, variety. And on that note, I kind of want to explore the relationship between an individual editor and their house. For an editor to love a manuscript is necessary for the book to get acquired and published, but that alone isn't sufficient. The book also has to fit into the kind of vision and taste of an editor's colleagues and publisher. So I wonder if I could ask you both to talk a bit about the extent to which you have to keep in mind the identity and concerns of your imprint as you decide what books you want to acquire, and how you negotiate any gap that can kind of come to be between what you'd like to pursue and what the imprint wants to move toward.
I can start. So I'm kind of in a unique position. So I'm in Tiny Reparations Books, which is an offshoot of Dutton, which is under the Penguin umbrella. So Tiny Reparations Books was created by Phoebe Robinson in 2020. And it's what you call a diversity imprint. So it was created to showcase that anybody can write anything. There's been a lot of conversation about the need for diverse titles in publishing, and Tiny Reparations was one of those imprints that was created to fill that gap when it comes to stories that haven't been traditionally championed in the publishing atmosphere. So I can acquire for both Tiny Reparations and Dutton. So when something comes into me, I'm looking for who the author is. Are they from a unique perspective, a traditionally marginalized identity? Then that would mean I could acquire for Tiny Reparations. If they don't fall inside that category, I can acquire for Dutton. And sometimes something will come in and the author is from a traditionally ostracized identity, but it's a serious book. Now, if you don't know who Phoebe Robinson is, she's a comedian. So some authors have some feelings about being acquired by a comedian if they see themselves as a serious writer. So I would weigh whether this book is better published by Tiny Reparations or Dutton. So there is a house identity that factors into where a book is published, for sure. And also whether people on the team like the book, right? That's the first step. So if something comes in and the folks that I work with are not seeing it, then their unenthusiasm will affect the book's trajectory. So I'll just let it go. I can't be the only person in-house who loves the book. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
All good. Yeah, certainly the identity of the imprint plays a large role in what you pursue and what you think you can publish well. In my case, Knopf has been around since 1915. It has a long reputation. It's published many great writers. and you're kind of up against that reputation as an editor. You know, is this as good as Toni Morrison? I don't know. And you know, we are also made up of the people in that house right now. So you know, there's the reputation of the imprint, but there's also just the crew that has stuck around and is the current iteration of Knopf. And absolutely, when I have something in, I might immediately think about a colleague I can pass it to and say, hey, what do you think about this? And understand that I can build a conversation among the people at the table. I mean, think about the kinds of, how different a conversation could be depending on who's sitting at your table. And you know, we kind of know who each other are, and I know what's gonna work in that crew. And then that's going to be represented all through the process as it pushes out to our publicity and marketing teams and our sales teams, who tend to stick around. It's really a lot of the same people. So you know who's going to be in that room, and you know what will surprise and excite them as an editor.
Wow, what a sound. Okay, I think we're all okay. Thank you, but you know, honestly, your responses call to mind this quote by Robert Gottlieb, who is a former head of Knopf and head of the New Yorker, the late Robert Gottlieb. He said in his memoir, Avid Reader, that his job as an editor was to make his enthusiasm contagious. And I think that that's really well worth reflecting on, because I think a lot of times in like a writer's imagination, agents can seem like the person kind of, you know, banging the drum and kind of, you know, rallying the troops. But editors have to do so much of that work when they want to acquire a book and convince their colleagues of that. There is, of course, a big difference between, you know, a house founded in 2020 and a house founded in 1915. And to kind of travel back in time a little bit, I'd like to quote from a credo, the Borzoi Credo, which was published by Knopf in the Atlantic Monthly in 1957. It was sort of like a Hippocratic Oath or something for publishers. It was like a bunch of, it's kind of a funny series of commandments. The last of which, though, is, I believe that magazines, movies, television, and radio will never replace good books. That's, of course, very stirring. 1957 is, of course, also not 2026. And I guess I just kind of want to talk to the two of you about whether or not that oppositional stance to other media, you know, books versus the world of screens, is that still making sense today in a world where, you know, TikTok is driving sales to the extent that it is, for example? Also, as you know, LaShonda, it's, you know, Phoebe Robinson is, you know, she's kind of used and leveraged her like position as a best-selling author, podcaster, producer, actor to, you know, start an imprint, which is not something every celebrity does. So, you know, I guess my question is whether or not you feel publishing has like an oppositional or more collaborative stance toward other media. And I guess the second part to that is there are so many celebrities, actors, stars who have audiences of millions they could reach on their own. Why do they still want to publish a book? And what is it that a book can uniquely do that other media can't?
Well, first of all, you have to look down to read a book. That's the best part. Unless you're listening to the book now, which is also great. No, I think it's collaborative. You know, a lot of the agents who are sending us work are positioned at agencies that represent actors and other versions of celebrities, and there is definitely crossover. Obviously, books have been adapted into film for a long time now. That's not new, and you know, I think with long form podcasts, radio, I mean, these are all formats that have always been in conversation with a book. I think a book continues to be a book and continues to provide what that one form of media can do. I don't think that's changed in any way. And I think, you know, especially thinking of a nonfiction project, even like thinking to the panel yesterday and the kind of time and energy it takes to do what a book can do, and even the way it can go beyond the TV covers that everyone has seen, and you realize, hey, someone on the ship had a camera on their wrist, as we learned about one of the projects yesterday. I mean, these are the kinds of things that someone who has the space of a book-length manuscript can do. And you know, that's what we're there to support. I think if that project is then adapted into a film and it brings more people into the fold to consume that media, I mean, that's a dream for many people, and I don't see it as oppositional. No.
Yeah, I completely agree. I feel like in this day and age, everything has to be embedded within each other. Everything touches, if that makes sense. Like you said, Book Talk is one example. Book Talk is driving sales. It's turning more people into readers, even though it's very specific genres. But I just feel like there's something a book does that an audiobook doesn't do, that an ebook doesn't do. Well, maybe an ebook does, but I feel as if people feel they've accomplished something really amazing when they've written a book, and they don't get that same sense when they do something else in a different medium. It's just something very substantial about it.
Right, and I think part of that substantial thing is like time too, which is like what we're talking about. Like it takes time to write a book, it takes time to read one. It's not kind of an instant gratification thing, and yeah, and it's also lasting in a way that maybe those other things aren't. You know, it's kind of an old adage that when you can't say something both true and kind, you should try and say something not untrue and not unkind, which is my way of talking about pass letters and the art of the tasteful pass letter. For everyone here, that's just the letter when an agent has sent a manuscript to an editor, and the editor, whether they love it and just feel they can't pursue it in-house, or whether it's not resonating with them, they kind of politely pass on it. I think sometimes authors consider the submission of a manuscript to be like this, you know, make or break one moment. This is like their audition in like the hit musical Fame or something. Like this is like really gonna do it for them. I think that puts a lot of pressure on it. I found in my experience, I don't know about you two, but I kind of find that submissions are more the beginning of a conversation, and you know, like an evolving relationship with an author. So I guess I'd love to hear from the two of you whether there was ever an instance where kind of a no to an author in a particular project turned into a yes down the line, or whether a no sort of led to a productive conversation with like an agent or an author that kind of led to something down the line.
Yeah, I can start. So I rejected a historical novel about Hattie McDonald, who was a famous Black actress, and I believe was maybe the first Black actress to get an Oscar. Yes. So I really liked the idea, but I felt like the execution was all wrong. And I wrote a very long pass, and I think 3 months down the line, the agent reached out and was like, hey, I sent this pass to the author, they revised, and we ended up selling it somewhere. So that's one example I can think of right off the bat. But I also do a lot of consider revising and resubmitting type of passes, where it's just like, I like a lot about this, I think X, Y, and Z needs to be fixed if you don't end up selling this project. I am happy to talk to the author and talk about like what I think needs to be done on the condition that you only submit to me. I do a lot of those. So yeah, a submission doesn't have to be a rejection-esque thing, doesn't have to be the end of the conversation, for sure.
As the great Bob Gottlieb said, he's already been invoked once, gone today, here tomorrow. So much of what you send away somehow comes back to you. I don't know if I've ever had something I turned down come back in and then I haven't acquired it. I can say that for me, a pass is a reflection of my own time that I've spent with that manuscript. So if it's something I knew really quickly that it's not for me, my rejection letter would be probably short. And if it's something I spent time with and wrestled with and had, you know, maybe came close to bringing on, I'm going to put that all back into the letter. So I just want it to be a reflection of the time I've spent with it. And sometimes that means you come pretty close to acquiring, and, you know, you'll get a revise and resubmit. sometimes those sell to other presses. You're constantly seeing things you turn down, sell somewhere else, and that's one of the fun parts of the job. And then watching from the stands to see if it works or not. And I've also, in many cases, worked on manuscripts that I didn't buy before it's under contract in hopes that it's going to come to me in a state that I can acquire. One example is an author I share with Mike Mungello, a guy named Bud Smith, who's a novelist, and he's a heavy construction worker who writes on the side, and he kind of has his own idiom and you know, not the typical thing you'd say that Knopf is going to jump at. So we worked a really long time, I want to say 3 years, on a novel. This was would be a second book with him. Before I even brought it to anyone else in the house, because I wanted to make sure it was in the kind of state that once I gave it to my colleagues and our publisher, that they would feel like it was ready and it had what it needed to be published by us. So, you know, there's all kinds of commitments you're making to things that you haven't yet signed up.
No, that was great. That was, yeah.
For you.
Oh yeah, it's great for everyone. But yeah, on that note, as just a quick follow-up, apropos assumptions or stereotypes about the process, is there one thing, or what is one of the things that you wish first-time authors submitting their manuscripts, via their agents, what's kind of one thing that you kind of wish they all knew about what it's like on your side of the table? No pressure.
I just had a workshop this morning, and one thing I said to that group was that when I came into publishing, you're always hearing how it's all about connections and friendships, and everyone's sort of patting each other's back and publishing their friends. Part of that may have been true at a time, and there still may be things that slip through that way. But my experience is that even if my best friend handed me their manuscript, I would need the good reads from my colleagues, from our publisher. There is no easy guarantee of a manuscript going through. And I think that kind of sense of being not part of the crew and not, privileged to have a deep connection into the industry can be crippling. And I think it's really not what it looks like when you're there, because the bar to getting something published is really high. And it has to be there on the page. And a connection may get you a read, but I don't think it's ever going to get you a contract.
Yeah. I wasn't sure if you were referring to submissions or the whole process. But I guess one thing that I wish authors knew is I as the editor care as much as you do, maybe even more. I think that sometimes authors feel like they're in it alone and they're the only ones who care, and they need to maybe fight for their book. And I don't think anybody fights harder in-house than the editor. So a good editor is 100% on your side. They want the book to win. And sometimes we get to a tough spot where maybe the book has just come out and maybe the sales aren't what they're supposed to be, and the author is frustrated, and they think that they're the only ones who care. And it's just no, I bought this book because I love it, as much as you do. So there should definitely be teamwork makes the dream work type of mentality for the editor-writer relationship.
Yeah. No, totally. And I feel like that's also a useful way of framing the notion of relationships, and it's less not who you know, but more how you are with each other, and knowing that you're entering a series of partnerships, first with the agent, and then author and agent with the editor, and we all are really on the same side of the table in this moment, literally, but also figuratively. We want the best for the book. So every panel kind of presents unique opportunities. Here we have the unique circumstance of both editors working for the largest of the big five houses, Penguin Random House. I wonder if the two of you could talk a little bit about the good of that, the bad of that, the kind of resources and strictures of working for such a titanic corporation.
Yeah, I mean, obvious upsides, tons of resources. We have the best marketing, publicity, folks working for us, we have the most dollars to put behind a project, marketing, publicity-wise. We can offer the most on projects, so that makes us highly competitive. I guess the downside is that the barrier to entry is that much higher. Like the work needs to be good in order for it to be put in-house, just like Todd was saying. Colleagues need to also love it. And there's stiff competition. I find that we usually all are kind of bidding for the same things with the top 5 houses. So it takes much more to acquire the book. So there's a higher price tag, which means it takes more for the author to be profitable, which also means it takes more for the author to build their brand, right? So like if we're paying a very high advance, there's a very high chance that the author won't earn out, right? So their next book will have to reduce the cost, or like there's a bad track, right, compared to how much we paid, right? So it's just the competition is mostly a con, I think, because I was going to say pros and cons, because it just makes the stakes all that much more higher for the author. They don't really get a chance to like build their audience and really grow and build their brand.
Right.
Yeah, not too much to add there. I think that sounds about right. And I mean, and I would add only that, you know, in addition to that, you have really, really good sales teams who can be represented all around the country and go into all the indie bookstores and the larger box sellers and be that next level of advocate for your book. And again, those people, I think, in a larger house tend to stick around and are able to be a part of the whole conversation of selling that book. And the difference it can make is enormous. If they can get indie bookstores onto a book, I mean, it really does, in this world where everything is so hard to discover, like that, having that physical support in place is huge. And then, yeah, occasionally letting go of something that's a little more experimental, or that, you know, is the work of an author who, I think there's a level at which if the work is good enough, you can get the press on board. I think that's true at Knopf right now. I think sometimes you get a first work that's almost there, but you can see where that author's heading, and you know that if you put in the investment, you're going to get there in the future projects. Sometimes we lose that kind of author, and that can be upsetting.
And as a quick follow-up, do you think that like pre-existing platform, or in the case of history, say, you know, academic credentials, is that stuff more a pronounced factor at a large house, at PRH, than at, say, like an independent place?
I think we'd all be happy if we knew that the person we're publishing already has a huge built-in audience. I mean, it's a free token. It can't be the only token, but I mean, we're in the business of selling books. If someone has a built-in audience, you'd say the same thing in music. You'd say the same thing in film. I mean, that's going to make a huge difference. So I don't think a small press would look sideways at that either. I think they'd be thrilled.
Yeah, just to add in newsletters, Reddit, Substacks, like they're all so big right now, and actually are doing more for us than social media followers and subscribers. So just having those like built-in networks and connections really does help.
Yeah, no, totally. And again, it's kind of like revisiting that theme of relationships rather than just who you know. Like, it's not even so much followers as it is like a community of readers who are actively engaged. So it's like you know, it doesn't need to be like 1 million readers on Substack, but so long as you have like a substantial number that's engaged, it seems like that kind of moves the needle. And also, you know, as Todd was saying, even for literally the largest publishing company in the world, independent bookstores mean everything, and the publishing ecosystem relies on independent presses, independent bookstores. As a brief question, I wonder if I could ask if the two of you have like an independent press that you kind of admire or sort of, you know, look up to, kind of, you know, enjoyed in your own life as a reader.
I used to read a lot of the feminist press books, but it's been a while since, it's been like 2 years since I've looked up what they've been up to, but that's like one of my favorites. Yeah.
Right now, I've been very excited about World Poetry Books, run by a guy named Matvey Yankelevich, who is publishing poetry from all around the world in translation, and the list is just incredible, one after another. Is there anyone else I love? The Song Cave is another great small poetry publisher. I'm secretly a poetry guy, so this is all a ruse.
Undercover. I think maybe I'll do one more question, then I would be delighted to turn it over to you guys. But I think a lot of times authors talk about lineage, talk about people who inspired them or kind of broke the path for them. I wonder if the two of you have like an editor or publisher who kind of inspires you, or who's sort of like a North Star for your own practice and what it is you'd like to do with your list.
Yeah, I started off under Christine Pride. She's no longer an editor. She's actually an author now, but she was the first person who I saw how to edit from, and she still like edited by hand. So I was like going through and inputting her edits in manuscript Word. So I feel like she taught me how to edit, and she kind of saw everything. So I feel like I'm still aspiring to be the editor that she is, or was.
Yeah, definitely a few people. The aforementioned Ann Close, who showed me everything I knew in the first 5 years, along with Deborah Garrison, who's the poetry editor at Knopf. With Ann, it was really more about the lore and the stories and the kind of what it feels like to be in the world of publishing. When I got there, she'd been there for over 40 years, so she had just seen so much change from. She told me that Knopf got its good reputation because they would send the manuscripts back to the agent quickly, because at that time the agent would only print so many manuscripts, and they had a limited amount. And the sooner the editor sent it back, the sooner they could send it elsewhere if you'd said no. So just kind of feeling the long line of how we've gotten to where we've gotten. Anne was a big influence for me there. Coming into the industry, I was always looking at a man named Jonathan Galassi, who was the president and publisher for R. Strauss, only because he'd combined his translation work with his editorial work, and that was something I was hoping to pull off if I could. Within Knopf and Pantheon, I also looked up to a man named Dan Frank, who was just incredible. When I got there, one of my favorite authors was Richard Holmes, and I was like, whoever is doing Richard Holmes, I have to meet that person. And Dan was incredibly generous with me in my first couple of years there.
Thank you both. That was very very moving to hear it. And again, just kind of thinking about it as like participating in this like lineage and this kind of like family of publishers. I'd be delighted to open it up to any questions from the audience, if anyone has anything they'd like to ask. Yes, you, sir.
In listening to you talk about an author's first book, hoping towards the second, towards the third, is a first-time author's age a factor in whether you're going to take on that author?
Also, just to paraphrase, I unfortunately will have to paraphrase the questions for those viewing from home. So the question is, does age factor in, and to what extent, when considering a first-time author?
I don't think so. We had an older author on the Dutton list, and we used that as a selling point. We were just like, I'm forgetting how old they were, but it was like, first novel at this age, how miraculous, how grand. So I think, use what you have. Sure.
Completely agree. Yeah.
Yes.
You talked about independent publishers and Big Five. What about hybrid publishers? What do you think of the hybrid publishing process, as well as what should one look for if they decide to go that route with the hybrid publishing?
Right. So this is a question about the value of hybrid publishers and what an author should look out for or keep in mind if they're considering that route.
This is for hybrid manuscripts or publishers publishing
Hybrid publishers or hybrid agents that would take on, that would want to pass on the manuscript to an editor that might do with a hybrid.
And sorry, just to ask a kind of a clarifying question. By hybrid publisher, do you mean like a publisher who, rather than offering a traditional advance and royalty model, suggests perhaps the author pay a certain amount? Yeah, okay.
I'm still trying to figure out what it all means.
Sure. Yeah, of course, yeah.
Sure. I don't have a ton of insight there, but I will say that self-publishing is alive and well. I don't think you need to put your own money in the pot or much of it to get going. I think the number of successful self-published books that have then found a larger publisher is increasing. And the tools for discovering those writers are multiplying. So, I think if you're trying a different route, proceed with caution before you dump your own money in. Or dump your money in on the other side of publicity and marketing and publish it. And yeah,
So
yeah.
one can get a book published easily. I mean, I can print it out or whatever. And then does the book then go to, because I always feel like if the book is published, and that's it. You got what you got. No one's going to pick it up because it's been published. Is that correct?
So if it's out there and been published, it's at the end of the line, and can it be republished? It can absolutely be republished. I think we talked about magazine publishing. There's an element of discovery there. If you've put it up on your Substack, maybe a journal isn't going to want to take it because it's already out there. But I think that's less true of the book world. I just bought a vintage original paperback book called Man and Horse. It was a memoir of a guy's journey on horseback across the U.S. in 1974. It sold 25,000 copies on its own. So that's to me, that's an amazing beginning for the book rather than a barrier.
Yes.
Do you have a number in mind of like how many books you need to sell, like for you to take on an author? Like is there a threshold?
So just to confirm, the question is, does the editor is there a certain number of units an editor has to see a book selling in order to move forward? Yeah, sure.
I don't think there's a specific number, but if we see that it's trending and that it continues to sell, maybe steadily, then we do the in-house calculations and see like if we put our marketing and publicity behind it, that would even boost the trajectory even more, right? So I think steady sales versus a specific number sold is more helpful to us.
Yeah, for a fiction or a nonfiction project, I would call it the number I have to delude my colleagues into thinking is possible is probably around 10,000 right now. But we publish 150 books a year at Knopf, so everyone's fighting for space, and it doesn't mean we're going to get there. It doesn't mean you have to get there. It just means we can talk about it at that number and not feel totally insane.
Right, and just as a brief postscript to that, in the acquisitions process, the editors will create a sort of formal document known as like a P&L or like a profit and loss document that's essentially like an assessment or projection of how many copies they believe will sell. And that, of course, is a variable that informs the advance that's offered. So, there may be like a number to move forward, and then there's another order of consideration of like, not just to move forward with an acquisition, but what's the level of advance that we can offer. But yeah, it's tied to that projected number. Yes?
This is another sort of commercial question. I've noticed with myself and with friends that how much money is going to be spent or resources are going to be spent on publicity and marketing, and that for authors it feels kind of like a black box, like, oh, your book is wonderful, blah, blah, and then it could be there's a lot is going to happen, and it could be there's very little. And from our point of view, it's very hard to judge that. And other than what the print run is going to be, the first print run, the size of the advance, are there any other tells? Because I sort of feel when I'm talking to my friends that just assume they're going to do nothing. and do as much as you can that makes sense that you can make happen.
Right. So yeah, that's a great question. Yeah. So what are the tells basically for for an author to discern what it is the publisher will be responsible for in terms of marketing and publicity, and what should they kind of take on themselves?
I mean, first of all, I would say that there's a difference between the budget that we're going to have for marketing and publicity and the sort of built-in salaried marketers and publicists who are assigned to each and every title. So every title is going to get a marketer and a publicist who are going to do work whether they have a budget or not. And a lot of that is the main part of the work. What is going to determine then if that book has more of a budget other than the two people working on it? You know, it's a little of a black box for editors too. They're trying to keep it from us. You know, there's always another hire.
That's why I let you go first. I'm like, does he know more than than I do?
There's always a higher meeting where they decide these things, and you know, when the budget's there, it's great. It's not the biggest thing. You know, I did a book called Goliath's Curse that was looking at like societal collapse over the last 5 millennia. It got a Guardian article that was, I think it was a review/interview, and sold like 4,000 copies overnight. And then things moved, and it had nothing to do with anything anyone did. It was just, you know, a lot of the marketing and publicity now is reactive, and we're seeing when you put it out there in the world, are things drawing toward that magnet? What are our excuses for adding budget to a project? And an author can be a part of that. You know, you can go out there and create some of those excuses for us, and they're very helpful. And the editor, who is also a little bit in the dark on some of this, is happy to have them and make use of them.
Yeah, just to add on to that, it is like a bigger, above my pay grade type of conversation, but I have noticed that when things are happening organically for the book, like there's word of mouth, there's reviews going on, people get excited, and I feel like more things happen. So I think, you know, people do their jobs, and then if things start to react, then there is maybe more added to the budget. Yeah.
Yes, in the corner.
So you two were talking about obviously the importance of having a built-in audience and those sorts of things, social media presence. I was wondering if an author doesn't have like any social media presence, what do you think about that as a manuscript that you love and you think has potential? Is that a non-starter or is it?
So is it a non-starter if an author doesn't have social media or platform?
An author's social media account has never figured into whether I buy something. If the work is on the page and I really, really love it, that's like the last of my concerns. What really helps is if the author has had previous publications, like maybe at a journal, or is like very plugged in with people who are influential in the literary world. So maybe they are friends with like some like known authors and can get blurbs in and can get quotes and stuff like that. That is so much more valuable. People who will be conversation partners with you, time of publication, that has done so much more for my books than social media presence.
Yeah, definitely not a requirement. In some ways, I'm like, all right, we got a real writer here. And yeah, that's it.
I asked LaShonda a question yesterday in a workshop, and I understood your answer, but it wasn't what I wanted to hear, so I'm going to try again.
Oh, no.
So
Gone
my
today, here
question
tomorrow.
was, in our workshop, we have several academics. Some of us have PhDs in ethnic studies, pursuing rhetoric. My area is philosophy, and that's where I worked before, taught, published. And so now, some of us are getting into creative writing. My question to you was, you don't want to pigeonhole an author, right? Neither do you want them to be tough to nail down for the public. So as much as we have the person, the author, there's also this persona out there. Now, if your answer to me was, how do we manage this, not pigeonholing, not having the author hard to nail down?
your answer was, well, some people publish under different names. I don't want to do that. Neither will you ever find me on TikTok. Do you ever help an author along when they publish in this area, for example, philosophy, but then also creative writing, and there really is, to me, this ongoing thread between the two. But do you ever help an author along in maybe their second or their third book, keeping this thread going where they are noticeable and appreciated as the same author, but they are doing different things in nonfiction, fiction, so that they don't disappear from readership?
That's a great question. So the question is, to paraphrase, how can an editor best facilitate an author's moving from one genre to another, and whether that is, precluding your working with them, or whether that's something that you have the flexibility to encourage and facilitate as an editor?
I mean, I think we saw the living proof with Hector Tobar last night, and the sort of vast variety of work he's doing. I would add to that a writer we published named Lawrence Wright, who did The Looming Tower and has done a series of incredible nonfiction, who pivoted to fiction. He wrote a kind of pandemic-y novel right around COVID. He had fully finished before COVID happened, and then went on to do a couple more novels, and now he's back to nonfiction, and that's been fine. I think in his case, he had his established track as a successful nonfiction author, and maybe there was a little more faith there for him to go out and do the creative work. But I think moving back and forth between fiction and non, and even poetry, we have poets who write fiction, crossing those boundaries is part of supporting that author's career. I don't see a problem. It may be that one of the nonfiction projects is more suited, let's say, to a university press. That doesn't mean your relationship is over with the other publisher.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I wonder if one editor has the range to do both philosophy and creative nonfiction, so you have two different houses that do that work.
And you'd also want to find an editor, perhaps, let's say if there's a bid or something and you're choosing, maybe choose that editor who's doing both fiction and non, to make sure that they have the flexibility to publish you.
Yeah, of course. Yes, in the back.
Yeah, I was wondering, how is the advance determined? Is it comps? Is it credentials? And is there a way for a debut especially to increase the advance?
Got it. Okay, so this is literally the $1,000,000 question. The question is, how are advances determined? Is it based on comparable titles, or what other information is that based on?
Todd said vibes. No, it's really all the power of the read and the competition, honestly. So if something comes in and it is incredible, and I send it around to my colleagues and they also say it's incredible, and the agent has sent it out to maybe 10 different houses and all the editors agree that it's incredible, I'm gonna need to pay more because the competition is fierce, right? So I have my base number, which is determined by the comparative titles, which are books that are like this book that I'm considering, right? But then factoring the competition, I might go a little higher.
Yes.
I wanted to ask about decisions to buy and when you decide it's worth taking a risk on something that you want changes to. Like I've heard of past letters that said, I loved this book until the ending and then I had to pass, and others that have said, I love this book until the ending, will you change it? And so I'm wondering kind of what kind of determines the difference in that decision.
Right. So the question is, how does an editor decide whether to simply pass and part ways, and how do they decide, on the other hand, whether to work with the author to revise? What kind of warrants that sort of different investment?
Revise what, buy before revise?
Right. To like revise before you buy. The answer here might also be vibes. So, but I'll defer to you both. Right. Yeah.
I think it's just Bless you. How much the editor resonated with the work, truly. If they really, really, really loved it and the ending messed it up, I think they would take that Arthur call and say, hey, are you willing to change this? And if you are, then I would love to maybe do X, Y, and Z. If they're passing because of the ending, I think they liked it, but not enough to do that work. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the author call. I think if it's coming that close, that's where the call can make a real difference, because you kind of know what you have there, you can see where it's going, and it's just a matter of speaking to that person and getting a feel for whether your vision for the book lines up with theirs, or if you're pulling them in the direction they don't want to go in. That can be a big help. I think if it's not getting to the call and they turn it down for the ending, yeah, it must have just been that equation of how much work it's going to take and how much time I have for that work. You know, sometimes that editor may say, I only have 2 books on my list for that next year. Maybe I'll take this on because I have a little more time to dig in and get it right. Whereas an editor with 9 books on their list next year would be like, I can't do it because I'm not going to be able to dedicate what I need to make it work.
Yeah, it's funny. There's this Mark Twain line where he says that the difference between the almost right word and the right word is the difference between the lightning bug and the lightning. And I feel like that's kind of the difference between like an editor liking a book and loving a book. It's like a fine line, but it's like it's such a difference in like commitment and where you feel you can take it. Any other? Yes, in the back.
How much do like say you're trying to acquire a second or third or whatever book, how much do the sales of their prior book factor into your decision?
Right. So the question is, if you are acquiring a book by an editor, by an author who's published before, how relevant is the number of copies they sold of their prior book?
I'd be lying if I didn't say it was relevant. It's definitely relevant. I mean, the obvious easy case is that it did well, and that's about the easiest acquisition you can think of. If it did okay, then you can see it. You can see the sliding scale of like what you're going to need to feel about the book based on the previous sales. But I think, sometimes it's a matter of moving to a new press, and that press sees what the other one didn't. I mean, we deal with this a lot between hardcover and paperback, because sometimes we'll publish a book in hardcover, and we're hoping it's going to sell 20,000 copies, and it sells 2,000 copies, and then but we know we want to do a paperback. And we're already thinking about, it's almost like a second novel. Like, how are we going to reposition this paperback and talk about it in a new way? Maybe we're going to give it a new cover. Maybe we saw all the reviews were responding to this part of the book that we never mentioned in the copy in the first time. Or the horse was the favorite character, so we're going to put the horse on the cover. We're doing that a lot. And it's a very similar conversation to a second or third or later work that is coming with a track that isn't ideal.
Yes.
Just to follow up on that, if the book is like nonfiction with an academic press, say, or a quasi-academic press, but you're looking at fiction, or it's with a small indie press, and then you're looking at it, and the copies aren't what you would expect for your own press, how does that factor in? Or does it?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it definitely, like, we would recognize that, in fact, if we see an indie publisher sold 5,000 copies of this book and it was reviewed here and here, that could be a huge factor in that's a positive for the book, because we know that it's not the same game, and that could be a reason we're like, let's bring them, now it's time to move them over and bring them here and take another swing. I would see it as positive.
Yeah, and I always frame it as like their debut novel, fresh start, this, and this. So it's all about how you pitch it. We have a lot of respect for academic presses, so just the fact that you publish there, I think is like a star on your belt, for sure.
And I would add, going back to KB's question, with nonfiction and track, it's a little bit of a different game, because if the new topic is a topic of much more relevance or something, you know, that can be the determining factor regardless of track for the first book, just because the subject can make such a difference.
Yes.
So I have 3 follow-up questions. One is, I had a nonfiction on the state of the immigration system, and then I wanted to write a fantasy novel. Would you, as an editor, want me to approach you to see if you have a colleague who would be good on that piece, or would you not be offended at all if I reached out somewhere else? I was wondering, second, you all speak a little bit about the auction process, because in my head, there's like a guy with a gavel, and everyone's sitting there at once, but I imagine it's more like a 2-week period where people sort of you submit bids. And then you had also mentioned pre-contractual work that you do with authors, and I was wondering if you could speak more to what's reasonable to expect from an editor on pre-contractual work. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And just to summarize for those at home, it's 3 follow-ups. The first is, can editors refer an author to colleagues if, you know, the manuscript is good but just not in their genre? The second question is about the auction process, whether or not there is a man with a gavel or how it might otherwise work. And the third is just to kind of explore a little bit more the kind of pre-contractual, pre-acquiring revision process. And I would also, before passing it off to you both, I might add an asterisk to the second question, that the auction process may very well come up in the agent panel, which will be at 2:30.
Yeah, that was going to be the brunt of my answer, was that you're getting into agent territory here, because they're going to be the one who guides you with regard to genre. They're going to be leading the auction. And then what was the third one?
Oh, it was the pre-contractual revision work.
And that typically, the kind of working on a project pre-contract is also going to be a lot in conversation with the agent, because it's still kind of in their possession at that point. But so hopefully that'll be touched on.
Yeah. And then I think maybe like two or 3 more, if that sounds good to everyone. Yeah, Jordan.
Some time ago, there were editors who were cruising places like the New Yorker or Atlantic, and actually recruiting talent. And I'm thinking of just the sparkling things that we all read, and wow, that was really good. Like, I'm thinking of right now, the one that comes to mind is Peter Hessler's recent thing called the Paperboy's Secret. But things like that. Is that still going on? Are you out there sort of looking through magazines at all? And if so, I'm curious what magazines stand out for you.
Yeah. That's it.
Other than the obvious.
Right. So the question is, are editors still cruising magazines to find writers who are developing material that could turn into a book? And if so, which magazines do the two of you kind of turn to?
I think that's more of a thing for nonfiction, but back in the day when I was like young and hungry, I used to read a lot of literary journals and would send notes to authors and say, hey, do you have an agent? Would love to have a book from you one day. And I know that still goes on, and so that's still good practice.
Yeah, I think it's still happening, and not only is it still happening, a lot of it is pushed to the agents who are doing a lot of the discovering right now, and it's highly competitive. I mean, if one article gets some traction, let's say in the cut, you know, you're going to have 5 agents emailing you about, do you want to expand this into a book? I mean, I feel like there really is a lot of hunger on that end. It looks a little different. Some magazines, I mean, the Times Magazine is a hot place for that. You know, I think I love the Sewanee Review, Southwest Review. After this week, I'll probably take a look at the Alta Journal, and maybe Santa Monica Review, maybe Zizova. Yeah, but we're out there looking, and agents especially.
Yes, you, sir.
At the start of the talk today, the very first topic was screens and media that doesn't live in books. And that was a very interesting answer you gave, but I feel like there's probably a little more there, and I'm really curious about it. specifically on the level of porousness between the industry that you're in, which is all about books, and then people that are making miniseries and people that make films, and how many phone calls go back and forth, or is it just more kind of in the distance that perhaps this is a possibility for a property that you acquire?
And so the question for those at home is about the porousness between other media and publishing, and to kind of just expand on that a little bit more.
Well, there's something called Scouts, which I don't know if you guys know what that is, scouting. But there are people whose job it is to figure out what's going on in publishing, and they read everything, and they drive buzz. So there are film scouts, and there are TV scouts, and they talk to people within the publication. It's just like a huge ecosystem. So everybody is talking to everybody. So a film deal could be happening as a book deal is happening, right? So the lines are very blurred when it comes to media.
Yeah, and I would say that I think there was a time, even not that long ago, when if a book was going to be adapted, it was a huge it was just like, this is going to be a success. And I think now there's just so much out there that even an adaptation isn't a guarantee of a book's success. But I think that I just want to get at the core of this. What was the
The kind of porousness or feedback system that can exist.
Yeah, you know, as LaShonda was saying, you know, sometimes a book can be optioned even while it's under auction, and so that can be a major factor. Like, yeah, we just did a book called Yesteryear that's going, and a lot of the build of that book was the movie deal that Anne Hathaway had signed on to, and we were able to use that as part of our argument for promoting the book. Yeah.
That's good because I've got Anne Hathaway.
That's good. She's actually here today.
I'll text her.
Yeah, and then and I think this might be our last question. Yes, ma'am. Right, and so for those at home, the question to paraphrase is kind of about, given the paramount importance comps seem to have in presenting a book and in arguing for its timeliness and the kind of commercial possibilities of publishing it, how do you pick the right comps? And like, what does it mean to pick the right comp? Is that a fair paraphrase? Yeah, is it really that important? Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I would say that it's very helpful. And I think the more realistic you are, the better. You know, we get a lot of submissions with sort of very highly ambitious comps, let's say. We know what that is. I mean, I remember bringing a project to this is a note for agents, I guess. I brought it to my superior, and she looked at it, and she's like, this agent doesn't understand what this book is at all. And that was based on the comps they'd put on it. And it was sort of like, do we want to get into a deal where like no one really understands the market they're entering? And I think those comps and realistic comps can be a reflection of everyone's understanding of where we're headed. And yes, I think the hope is that it will defy comps, it will find audiences we didn't think it was going to go to. It's just part of that delusional initial stage of publishing a book, which is a gambling endeavor, to make sure that we're not making an insane gamble, that we're just making a slightly crazy gamble.
Awesome. Well, thank you all, and thank you, Todd and LaShonda, for your time and wisdom. Thank you, guys.
Hello? Hey. The elves say we are good to go. So I'm going to start this with just trying to clarify the information about today, okay? So all of you who are enrolled in the program, right? You've been spending your days and nights and mornings and evenings and all this time with us. You are signed up for the special Agent Hour event that happens after the first 20 minutes of the Agent Hour, right? I know that's a little complicated. And many of you have found your names, right, on this poster, and you have been assigned, you'll see, and this is in no particular order. You'll discover who your agent is later. It's a big surprise. You've assigned to people assigned to Agent A, yes, Agent B, Agent C, Agent D, Agent E. And if you don't know, don't get up and look now. You can look at the end. You'll be led away by an elf in about 20 minutes to a special, no doubt, ski bar where you will sit and sweat and await your secret agent who will come and then talk to you in a smaller, more intimate setting about the topics that will begin discussion today. So sorry for the confusion, but it's a little bit of fun, we like to think, and it gets you moving about so you can discover the other secrets of the Olympic House, right, as you do. And with that, our intrepid moderator up here doing back-to-back duty, Todd Portnowitz.
All righty, we're going to get this moving because we have limited time, and I know you want to get to your meetings. As many of you know, part of the job of an editor is to have lunch with agents. So this is like a 5-headed agent, and I'm just going to think of this as a lunch. Some of you were here earlier for Michael Carlisle, or Agent E over there, maybe not, his discussion with Jason Roberts and about their adventurous and inspiring and sometimes harrowing publishing process and partnership as agent and author. So I wanted to ask all of you about, clients you've had for a longer time and questions around, career and the kind of things that inspire confidence in you from authors you've been working with for a period of time, and then maybe a newer client that you've signed on and what it was about their writing what you leaned into, and sort of looking at these two different stages in the career of a author's relationship with an agent. And maybe we should start with Michael down there because we already heard a little bit from him earlier.
Hi. I was asked a question. Thank you for coming. This is the marketing side of the day. And I know you're here for altitude. I know you're here for the view. You're also here to understand how to connect to an agent, and we hope you will, and also how this process works. And you're at an advantage because you've been selected to be here. Each of you has submitted things that were looked at, and you are accepted, and so the likelihood of your finding someone, not perhaps one of us, but in general, is pretty good if you keep working at it. So don't give up. Don't give up. That's the most important. I want to tell two quick stories. Someone in the earlier panel asked me about luck, and I'm still a little flummoxed by whether or not luck comes or it just is luck. I need to find an author who wants to write a book on luck. There we go. But I'm lucky in two ways. I'm going to mention very briefly two people who have approached me with whom I work. One whom I have worked with for 35 books. 26 or 7 years, and somebody who wrote me over the transom. And in both cases, I think I'm lucky. The first is as a favor to somebody who is a Knopf author, was a Knopf author, National Book Award winner, one of my most prestigious clients named John Casey, who's got a book that if you're ever looking for great contemporary American literature, you should read Spartina, because that is a really great book. I had nothing to do with it. He was represented by another agent. He came to me afterwards, and when I left William Morris to start my own company, I was very nervous, and so I wanted my clients to follow me, and he was a client, and I said, would you come? And he said, sure. And I was so happy and so reassured to have a National Book Award winner on my new baby company list. And I said, what can I do for you? And he said, well, I am at Iowa this fall, and if you come to Iowa for one of the classes, I won't have to teach. And I didn't know creative writing teachers didn't like to teach, but he was one of those people who was happy to have his agent come. And I arrived in Iowa City. It was the last class. The front row was people who all came out of a Woody Allen film. They were gnarled up. They looked like Dostoevsky characters. They were in black turtlenecks. They really were authors, writers. I'm sure they are being published today by Knopf and other houses. I did something. I asked, where are you from? So it was Brooklyn, Queens, Brooklyn, and then San Francisco, and then there was one person from Nantucket. And Nantucket happens to be where I grew up as a kid, and I said, and this is indelicate, I said, would the person who is from Nantucket please see me afterwards? Those are the best lines I've ever said, because all the gnarled Dostoevsky characters were pissed off because they were not they weren't not from Nantucket, and suddenly this woman way in the back who was eager to get the heck out of Iowa City, hated the whole experience, had to stay and talk to me afterwards. Her name is Ellen Hildebrand. She sold more than 20 million copies. She's got something on Peacock right now, and it all started with one novel that she sent me 9 months later that I couldn't sell. I sold it for $5,000. She turned to me and said, is $5,000 a lot? I said, no, Ellen, it's not a lot, but it's the beginning of your career. And today, here we are. That's one. And the other is a gentleman who is a federal judge. I've never met him, except on the phone. His name is Jeremy Peterson. And he sent me a proposal about mediation. And it was called Stuck. And it's the fact that when you have a real disagreement, you need a third person to help you get unstuck. So we've been working about 3 or 4 months. We just sent it out. I've gotten my first rejection. And we changed the title from Stuck to Unstuck. And the reason is you want in a book to have something to look forward to. Or not, depending on how many more rejection letters we get. That's it.
Thank you, Michael. I should say, please introduce yourselves too as you go. So
Okay. Hi, I'm BJ Robbins. Nice to meet all of you. This is a weird, well, in 2000, I've been an agent for 34 years. I'm really only like 38 myself, so I started very young. And so I have a lot of clients I've had for a very long time. I'm sort of a loyal person, and they're loyal to me, and I'm very grateful for that. But I'm going to tell an example of a writer I met in 2013 in the green room of the LA Times Book Festival. A client of mine at the time said, oh, BJ, I'd like you to meet this writer. And I met him, and I said, well, why don't, he's been published before. I was like, oh, that's good. Can you send me some of your work? And he writes in a genre that I had never represented and would even put on my resume, I do not take this genre. The genre is horror. And he sent me, he gave me this resume. He published all these books and all these little presses, and he sent me this novel, and it was only 44,000 words, and I just was completely taken with it. It was really a coming-of-age novel about this kid trying to decide who he was going to be because his aunt and uncle, whom he lived with, were werewolves, and he didn't know if he was in fact going to become a werewolf at like 16. And I said, we had a long conversation. I said, this is what I need you to do with the novel. You need to expand it. You need to do this, that. He agreed. I said, I see a different trajectory for your career. Instead of publishing all these books 4 times a year with these little presses, I said, your readers can't even keep up with you. You're so prolific. I want to make sure you're published by a really good house with an editor who really understands you, and that every book you publish is an event. And he said, okay, let's do it. So the first book came, Mongrels was the name of it, and it came out with one house, and the editor left before the book came out. It did okay, but it wasn't like gangbusters. And I said, okay, we have to change houses. And so the next book, I had sent it out to the horror editors. I had to research because I didn't know any of them. And it didn't sell. It was rejected by all of them. And I was at a dinner at a writer's conference, and I meet this man who was an editor at Saga Press, a place I'd never heard of, an imprint at Simon & Schuster. And I said, I represent Stephen Graham Jones. He said, can you get me that manuscript like right now so I'll read it on my plane ride home? And I did. And he got home on Sunday, and on Tuesday made me an offer. And that book is The Only Good Indians, which came out smack in the middle, it was supposed to come out in May of 2020. And I remember calling Joe, the editor, and saying, well, this doesn't look good. Can we maybe push it? So we all decided that, this pandemic's gonna be over soon, so we'll publish it in July of 2020. But somehow, because everybody was trapped at home, there was a lot of advance buzz. And anyway, the book, it just exploded. It took off, and it completely changed his career. And so it's been a really exciting time since then. And I couldn't hold to the one book every couple of years. He's now publishing 2 books a year, and all the paperbacks and comic books, and it's just like crazy. He's the most prolific writer. Every writer I know hates him for this. And then on the other side of the coin, I do take writers over the transom. I look at submissions, and I have a client now who, like you were saying, I've been helping to develop her work. There was one novel that we worked on for a long time and decided, she said, well, while I was waiting for your notes, I wrote another novel. And that one I felt had more potential. So we're working on the process of getting that done, and so that's exciting. It's really exciting to me to discover new writers still, even after, in my decrepitude of being an old agent.
Hello, everyone. I'm Anna Ghosh, and I'm also probably 35. So I did start out in publishing a while ago. It seems like in a different era. And while actually the first author that I sold did end up becoming a New York Times bestseller, and I sold 8 books by that author, but it was in a genre that I did not really wish to represent, and it was a fantasy author. And I probably would have had a very different career. And I tell that story because I really wanted to represent, for me, my job has always been about finding writing that speaks to me as a reader, and that I somehow, it may not be a bestseller, it may not even be something for everyone, but it's adding something to the conversation that I think is important to get out there. And I've been lucky that some of them have broken through and become bestsellers. I had a book that was actually first sent to me as a collection of fiction by a soldier in Iraq during that war, and I asked him if it was true, and he said, it's all true. I said, you've got to make it nonfiction, and he called it The Last True Story I'll Ever Tell, and it was a New York Times bestseller. That was I felt like I did a job there. I said, this is nonfiction. But there's probably a dozen authors that I've had that I've worked with over the years, and since Sam Friedman is here, I want to thank him because I reached out to him when I was a very young agent because I loved what books were coming out of his class, and I'm happy to say that I've represented many writers that have come through him. And one of them, I'll just tell his story very quickly, of Ty, because he's sort of quintessential in the sense of having an amazing career and being committed to it, as well as doing other things to sustain a family and have a life. Because his first book was a very personal thing, which he wrote while he was at Columbia Journalism School, and it was something he could bite. He could write, he could contain it, he could be the expert on that. And it was about his family history of being Weather Underground and his grandparents who were also radicals of other kinds. But this next book was his dissertation for his, very efficient. And that was a slightly bigger story, but still related to the topics he was interested in. And, there's an interesting story of how he finds his topics. But it was a slightly bigger thing, and it was his dissertation, and it was about a year of anarchy in New York City. And then the third book, actually, I've sold like 4 books by him. I won't tell you all of them. But they each were connected in some way and grew out of that. And one of them was also canceled, actually, because he didn't want to write it. And he may, at some point, still do it. But, and now he's, I feel, tackling like an even more ambitious topic, a book about the Communist Party. As far as, of the American Communist Party, as far as sort of new writers, I would say it's almost the best part of the job, because you don't know who you're gonna meet, what they're gonna teach you about the world, and what will happen, with that book once it gets out in the world. I mean, I have a book that came out recently, and with a small press, but actually the perfect house for this book. It's called A Song for Hard-Hit People. It's by a young woman from Appalachia, and she's an activist, and she works for this organization called Standing Up for Racial Justice. And I see it in independent bookstores everywhere. I still don't know how well it's selling, but I love it because it speaks to the moment. It's a book for the moment, and she had been working on it, and she needed the confidence to write it. And she's with an activist press, Haymarket, but I think it's the perfect home for her book. They helped her write it. They'll help her reach her audience. So there's all sorts of journeys for each book and author, and I like to think that I can partner with them because I care about that work.
I love that. Hi, everyone. I'm Lucy Carson. I'm with the Friedrich Agency. Excited to chat with you all and do these breakout rooms. I'm going to try and do a speedy version of these 2 anecdotes because I'm sure you have other questions. And I think we could probably all go on for a while. So my first mini anecdote is about an author that I pulled right out of the slush pile in 2009, which was a moment where we were still getting like about half of the query letters by mail. And then people were starting to email, but there wasn't any query tracker or any portal. And this was a hard copy letter with a self-addressed stamped envelope. And it was a novel called The Adults. And it was one of those manuscripts, you'll all know what I mean, where there's just an incredible voice and then not really a story. But we were very taken with that voice and ended up doing 3 or 4 drafts of deep revisions to try and find a plot and hang on to it and hang this voice on the scaffolding of something. And we ended up doing a modest, little mini 3-bidder auction for this debut novel, and it came out. It sold about 5,000 copies, which is okay, and got a really good New York Times review that compared the author's voice to Woody Allen. Remember, this is before we all decided we hate Woody Allen, so it was a really big compliment at the time in 2010. But it came out and was sort of this modest debut that was critically acclaimed, but not commercially successful. And the author took a few years to write her next manuscript and sent it to us, and it was a memoir. And we were very open to that idea, but the memoir was really raw and really unprocessed. There was a lot of grief that had not been given the distance it needed to kind of marinate. And we had a very difficult conversation with her where we sort of said, this isn't the book, to reduce it all down to that. And miraculously, she did not fire us and just take it elsewhere, which is what many authors would do and are in their right to do, and went away for years and years and came back with what became her second novel, which was very much about those events in the memoir, but had been fictionalized and had been processed through the lens of this other genre. And it was published by a new publisher. Her previous publisher didn't want it, but the new publisher was excited, and it came out to a little bit more success. And then she came to us a few years later and said, I've got something that I'm applying to this grant with, and it's only about 50 pages, but I don't want to apply to a grant without you guys reading it and signing off on it. And she sent us the 50 pages, and we said, this is going to be a massive hit. This is going to be your breakout book. 16 years into your career, this third novel is everything. And it was, and it has been, and it's changed her life forever. And it's called The Wedding People. And it's been a very long-term, complicated relationship, but it started with a voice and no story and evolved through the course of the things that she needed to process and books that were different and challenged her, and then the book that became her most accessible. So sharing that for, variety. And then I just sold something 2 weeks ago that is a debut novel. And it was a very interesting process because the working title is Horse Girls. And it's narrated in the first person plural by 3 best friends who are horse girls, who are 14. And I was a page and a half into this manuscript when I started writing down the names of the editors that I wanted to send it to. So for me, and readers process things differently, but as an agent, if you start getting those names in your brain and it's like been 500 words in, you kind of cancel your plans, right, to read the thing and do what you have to do. In this case, I got on a plane to Boston from LA to sign her because there were other agents in the mix and I wanted to shine brightly. And I did, and I made her an insane diorama that was canonically accurate to her novel, and she was like, okay, you're psychotic, so let's work together. And so, but it was a very exciting auction, and there were 13 editors in the mix, which translated to 6 bidders, thanks you to the mergers that we've had in this industry. Amen. And she ended up choosing the editor who essentially said to her, I love this book, but it's important to me that not only fellow horse girls pick it up and read it. Like, it's so much more than that. It's so universal, even though it's also very specific. And I think those are the best books, where something specific becomes hugely relatable through the art of the storytelling and the characters and the tension. And this editor essentially said, I might be the only person telling you this, but I don't know if we should go with Horse Girls as a title. And if we do go with it, let's make sure our package really leans into the fact that this is very literary, and it is not YA, and it is a coming-of-age story, but it is very much for an adult audience. And we want, here at this imprint, we would want to build a career for you where this is the beginning, but you're not just the Horse Girls author forever. Like, you have other stories to tell. You're not just going to give us novels about horses, right? And so Vivian, the author, really connected to that and wasn't hearing that from any of the other editors she spoke to. So we sold the novel to Sarah McGrath at Riverhead, and it's very exciting, and we may end up using that title or not, but that's something really recent that I thought was interesting, in that it's about packaging and positioning and the nuances of that. So.
Hey everyone. Yeah, that would help. Hey everyone, I'm Mike Mangello. I'm an agent at Inkwell, and yeah, my like long-term client story is kind of tied to my newer client story. I think authors can like agents, but I think authors really love other authors, and so I feel very lucky that like my long-term clients have kind of been a pathway to my newer clients, and that my newer clients feel like they're like carrying on a lineage from my longer term clients. So I guess to make the story very brief, 10 years ago I started working in publishing, and I was reading online magazines. I was reading this online magazine called Hobart, and there was a poem in there by this guy, and it was a poem about him just hanging out with his wife, and they're day drunk in New York, and they love each other, and they're happy. And I was like, this is like one of the best poems I've ever read. So I just went to his Twitter when Twitter wasn't as evil, and R.I.P. And it said he was doing a reading that night. So I went there. Never really been to like a New York reading before. He was reading with Carmen Maria Machado before Her Body and Other Parties came out. And then he read, and I thought it was just great. And I was like so shy to like go up to him after. So he came up to me and he said, what brought you here tonight? And I said, your work. I read your poem today. And then he said, then you're my friend. And then we kind of started as friends. And then things became more serious. And he was like, Mike, love if you could be my agent. I said, I'm honored. That's great. His name's Bud Smith, and his day job is working heavy construction in Jersey City. He had been publishing a lot with like really small presses. For his first book, he sent it to the publisher, and they sent it back not edits, but tape recorder. They had all just gotten drunk and turned on tape recorder and just talked about different ideas they had for like how to edit it. So that was kind of where he was coming from, and he had this manuscript, and I was like, I think this is great. And I sent it on to Todd, our wonderful moderator, and Todd saw the same kind of potential for breakout that I saw, and that book became Teenager, which came out with Vintage a couple years ago, and that was like such a great experience. But most of all, was like Bud and I became very close, and he introduced me to another writer, Michael Bible, who was also great and kind of in that indie scene. And then more recently, a couple years ago, there were these two writers who had kind of started a magazine in New York, and they wanted to throw like a lot of events and a lot of like parties, and they really celebrated this indie culture that Bud and Michael Bible had come from. And so they were kind of throwing an event, and they invited me there. And while I was there, I got to meet the two authors running it. And those two authors are kind of two newer clients of mine, Annika Jade Levy and Madeline Cash, who earlier last year put out books called Flat Earth and Lost Lambs, which have, Annika was named a 535 by National Book Foundation, and Madeline's been, bestseller and done quite well for FSG. And so for me, the validating part of that is just kind of following your instincts and being like authentic to your own taste. It usually will lead to long-term loyalty from your clients, who will kind of direct you toward the newer ones.
All right.